Quo Vadis, chapter 7. Once the highest heads in Rome inclined before Acte, the former favorite of Nero. But even at that period she showed no desire to interfere in public questions, and if on any occasion she used her influence over the young ruler, it was only to implore mercy for someone. Quiet and unassuming, she won the gratitude of many and made no one her enemy. Even Octavia was unable to hate her. To those who envied her, she seemed exceedingly harmless. It was known that she continued to love Nero with a sad and pained love, which lived not in hope, but only in memories of the time in which that Nero was not only younger and loving, but better. It was known that she could not tear her thoughts and soul from those memories, but expected nothing. Since there was no real fear that Nero will return to her, she was looked upon as a person of wholly inoffensive, and hence was left in peace. Poppaea considered her merely as a quiet servant, so harmless that she don't even try to drive her from the palace. But since Caesar had loved her once and dropped her without offense in a quiet and to some extent friendly manner, a certain respect was retained for her. Nero, when he had freed her, let her live in the palace and gave her special apartments with a few servants. And as if their time Pallas and Narcissus thought freedmen of Claudius, not only sat at the feast with Claudius, but also held places of honor as powerful ministers, so she too was invited at times to Caesar's table. This was done perhaps because her beautiful form was a real ornament to the feast. Caesar for a matter had long since ceased to count with any appearances in his choice of company. At his table the most varied medley of people of every position and calling found places. Among them were senators, but mainly those who were content to be jesters as well. There were patricians, old and young, eager of luxury, excess, and enjoyment. There were women with great names who did not hesitate to put on yellow wig of an evening and seek adventures on dark streets for amusement's sake. There were also officials and priests who, at full goblets, were willing to jeer at their own gods. At the side of this was a rabble of every sort: singers, mimes, musicians, dancers of both sexes, poets who, while declaiming, were thinking of the sesterces which might fall to them for praise of Caesar's verses, hungry philosophers following the dishes with eager eyes. Finally, noted charioteers, tricksters, miracle wigs, tale-tellers, jesters, and the most varied adventurers brought through fashion or folly to a few days' notoriety. Among these were not lacking even men who covered with long hair their ears pierced in a sign of slavery. The most noted sat directly at the tables, the lesser served to amuse in time of eating, and wait for the moment in which the servants will permit them to rush at the remnants of food and drink. Guests this sort were furnished by Tigellinus, Vatinius, and Vitellius. For these guests they were forced more than once to find clothing befitting the chambers of Caesar, who, however, liked their society, through feeling most free in it. The luxury of the court gilded everything, and covered all things with glitter. High and low, the descendants of the great families, and the needy from the pavements of the city, great artists, and vile scrapings of talent, thronged to the palace to stay their dazzled eyes with splendor almost surpassing human estimate, and to approach the giver of every favor. Wealth and property, whose single glance might abase, it is true, but might also exalt beyond measure. That day Lygia too had to take part in such feast. Fear, or uncertainty and dazed feeling, not to be wonder, uh, not to be wondered at after the sudden change, were struggling in her with a wish to resist. She feared Nero. She feared the people in the palace whose uproar deprived her of presence of mind. She feared the feast of whom shamelessness she had heard from Aulus Pomponia Graecina and their friends. Though young, she was not without knowledge, for knowledge of evil in those times reached even children's ears early. She knew therefore that ruin was threatening her in the palace. Pomponia, moreover, had warned her of this at the moment of parting, but having a youthful spirit, unacquainted with corruption and confessing with logical faith, implanted in her by her foster mother, she had promised to defend herself against that ruin. She had promised her mother, herself, and also that divine teacher in whom she not only believed, but whom she had come to love with her half childlike heart, for the sweetness of his doctrine, the bitterness of his death, and the glory of his resurrection. She was confident, too, that now neither Aulus nor Pomponia will be answerable for her actions. She was thinking, therefore, whether it will not be better to resist and not to go to the feast. On the one hand, fear and alarm spoke audibly in her soul. On the other, the wish rose in her to show courage in suffering, in exposure to torture and death. The divine teacher had commanded to act thus. He had given the example himself. Pomponia had told her that the most earnest among the adherents desire with all their souls such a test, and pray for it. And Lygia, when still in the house of Aulus, had been mastered at moments by a similar desire. She had seen herself as a martyr, with wounds on her feet and hands, white as snow, beautiful with a beauty not of earth, and borne by equally white angels into the azure sky, and her imagination admired such a vision. There was in much childish brooding, but there was in it also something of delight in herself, which Pomponia had reprimanded. But now, when opposition to Caesar's will might draw after it some terrible punishment, and the martyrdom scene of imagination become a reality, there was added to beautiful visions and to the delight a kind of curiosity mingled with dread, as to how they will punish her, and what kind of torments they will provide, and her soul, half childish yet, was hesitating on two sides. Paracte, hearing of this hesitation, looked at her with astonishment, as if the maiden were talking in a fever. To oppose Caesar's will, expose oneself from the first moment to his anger. To act thus one will need to be a child that knows not what it says. From Lygia's own words it appears that she is, properly speaking, not really a hostage, but a maiden forgotten by her own people. No law of nations protects her, and even if it did, Caesar is powerful enough to trample on it in a moment of hunger. It has pleased Caesar to take her, and he will dispose of her. Thenceforth she is at his will, above which there is not another on earth. So it is, continue Acte. I too have read the letter of Paul of Tarsus, and I know that above the earth is God, and the Son of God, who rose from the dead, but on earth there is only Caesar. Think of this, Lygia. I know too that thy doctrine does not permit thee to be what I was, and that you say as to the Stoics, from whom Epictetus has told me, when it comes to a choice between shame and death, it is permitted to choose only death. But canst thou say that death awaits thee and not shame too? Hast thou heard of the daughter of Sejanus, a young maiden, who at command of Tiberius had to pass through shame before her death, so as to respect a law which prohibits the punishments of virgins with death? Lygia, Lygia, do not irritate Caesar. If that is decisive moment comes when thou must choose between disgrace and death, thou will act as thy faith commands. But seek not destruction thyself, destruction, and do not irritate for a tribal cause, an earthly, and at the same time a cruel divinity. Acte spoke with great compassion, and even with enthusiasm, and being a little short-sighted, she pushed her sweet face up to Lygia's as if wishing to see surely the effect of her words. But Lygia threw her arms around Acte's neck with childish truthfulness and said, "Thou art kind, Acte." Acte, pleased by the praise and confidence, praised her to her heart, and then, disengaging herself from the arms of the maiden, answered, "My happiness has passed, and my joy is gone, but I am not wicked." Then she began to walk with quick steps through the room and to speak to herself as if in despair. No, and he was not wicked. He thought himself good at the time, and he wished to be good. I know the best. All his change came later, when he ceased to love. Others made him what it is. Yes, others, and Pompeia. Here her eyelids filled with tears. Lygia followed her for some time with her blue eyes, and asked at last, art thou sorry for him, Acte?" "I am sorry for him," answered the Grecian with a low voice. And again she began to walk, her hands clenched as if in pain, and her face without hope. "Dost thou love him yet, Acte?" asked Lygia timidly. "I love him." And after a while she added, "No one loves him but me." Silence followed, during which Acte strove to recover her calmness, disturbed by memories, and when at length her face resumed its usual look of calm sorrow, she said, "Let us speak of thee, Lygia. Do not even think of opposing Caesar. That will be madness. And be calm. I know this house well, and I judge that on Caesar's part nothing threatens thee. If Nero had given command to take thee away from himself, he would not have brought thee to the Palatine. Here Pompeia rules, and Nero, since she bore him a daughter, is more even under her influence. No, Nero gave command, it is true, that thou shalt be at the feast, but he has not seen thee yet. He has not inquired about thee, hence he does not care about thee. Maybe he took thee from Aulus and Pomponia only through anger at them. Petronius wrote to me to have cared for thee, and since Pomponia too wrote, as thou knowest, maybe they had an understanding. Maybe he didn't that at her request. If this be true, if he at request of Pomponia will occupy himself with thee, nothing threatens thee. And who knows if Nero may not send thee back to Aulus at his persuasion? I know not whether Nero loves him overmuch, but I know that rarely he has the courage to be of an opinion opposite to his." "Oh, Acte," answered Lygia, "Petronius was with us before they took me, and my mother was convinced that Nero commanded my surrender at his instigation." "That will be bad," said Acte, but she stopped for a while and then said, "Perhaps Petronius only said in Nero's presence at some supper that he saw a hostage of Linians Aulus and Nerus, who is jealous of his own power, demanded thee only because hostages belong to Caesar. But he does not like Aulus and Pomponia. No, it does not seem to me that if Petronius wished to take thee from Aulus, he will use such a method. I do not know whether Petronius is better than others of Caesar's court, but he is different. Maybe too thou wilt find someone who will be willing to intercede for thee, as thou not seen at Aulus, someone who is near Caesar. I have seen Vespasian and Titus. Caesar do not like them, and Seneca. If Seneca advised something, that will be enough to make Nero act otherwise." The bright face of Lygia was covered with a blush, and Vinicius. "I do not know him. He is a relative of Petronius, and returned not long since from Armenia." "Dost thou think that Nero likes him?" "All like Vinicius." And will he intercede for thee? He would. Acte smiled tenderly and said, Then thou wilt see him surely at the feast. Thou must be there, first, because thou must. Only such a child as thou could think otherwise. Second, if thou wish to return to the house of Aulus, thou wilt find means to beseeching Petronius and Vinicius to gain for thee by their influence the right to return. If they were here, both will tell thee as I do, and it will be madness and ruin to try resistance. Caesar might not notice thy absence, it is true, but if he notice it, and thou hast the daring to oppose his will, here will be no salvation for thee. Go, Lygia, dost thou hear the noise in the palace? The sun is near setting, guests will begin to arrive soon. Thou art right, answered Lygia, I will follow thy advice. How much desire to see Vinicius and Petronius there was in this resolve, and how much of woman's curiosity there was to see such a feast once in life, and to see it at Caesar, the court, the renewed Poppaea, and the other beauties, and all the unheard of splendor of which wonders were narrated in Rome. Lygia will not give account to herself of a certainty. But Acte was right, and Lygia felt this distinctly. There was no need to go. Therefore, when necessity and simple reason supported the hidden temptation, she ceased to hesitate. Acte conducted her to her own unctorium to anoint and dress her, and though there was no lack of slave women in Caesar's house, and Acte had enough of them for her personal service, still, through sympathy for the maiden whose beauty and innocence had caught her heart, she resolved to dress her herself. It became clear at once that the young Grecian, in spite of her sadness and her perusal of the letters of Paul of Tarsus, there was yet much of the ancient and Hellenic spirit, to which physical beauty spoke with more eloquence than aught else on earth. When she had undressed Lygia, she could not restrain an exclamation of wonder at sight of her form, at once slender and full, created, as it were, from pearls and roses. And stepping back a few paces, she looked with delight on that match's spring-like form. Lygia exclaimed she at last, Thou art 100 times more beautiful than Poppaea, but real in the strict house of Pomponia, where modesty was observed, even when women were even when women were by themselves, the maiden wonderful goddess, but reared in the strict house of Pomponia, where modesty was observed, even when women were by themselves, the maiden wonderful as a wonderful dream, harmonious as a work of Praxiteles, or as a song, stood alarmed, blushing from modesty, with knees pressed together, with her hands on her bosom, and downcast eyes. At last, raising her arms with sudden movement, she moved the pins which held her hair, and in one moment, with one shake of her head, she covered herself with it as with a mantle. Acte, approaching her and touching her dark tresses, said, Oh, what hair thou hast! I will not sprinkle golden powder on it. It gleams of itself in one place and another with gold, where it waves. I will add perhaps barely a sprinkle here and there, but lightly, as if a sun ray had freshened it. Wonderful must thy Lygian country be, where such maidens are born. I do not remember, answered Lygia, but Ursus had told me that with us it is forest, and forests. But flowers bloom in those forests, said Acte, dipping her hand in a vase filled with verbena, and moistened Lygia's hair with it. When she had finished this work, Acte anointed her body lightly with odoriferous oils from Arabia, and then dressed her in a soft gold-colored tunic without sleeve, over which was put a snow-wet peplus, But since she had to dress Lygia's hair first, she put a meanwhile a kind of roomy dress called synthesis, and seating her in an armchair gave her for a time into the hands of slave women, so as to stand a distance herself and follow the hairdressing. The other two slave women put on Lygia's feet white sandals, embroidered with purple, fastening them to her alabaster ankles with golden lacings strung crosswise. When at last the hairdressing was finished, they put a peplus on her in very beautiful light folds. Then Acte fastened pearls to her neck, and touching her hair at the folds with gold dust, gave command to the women to dress her, following Lygia with light eyes meanwhile. But she was ready soon, and when the first leaders began to appear before the main gate, both entered the side portico from which were visible the chief entrance, the interior galleries, and the courtyard surrounded by a colonnade of Numidian marble. Gradually people passed in greater and greater numbers under the lofty arch of the entrance, over which the splendid quadrige of Lysias seemed to bear Apollo and Diana into space. Lygia's eyes were struck by that magnificence of which the modest house of Aulus could not have given her slightest idea. It was sunset. The last rays were falling on the yellow Numidian marble of the columns, which shone like gold in those gleams and changed into rose color also. Among the columns, at the side of the white statues of the Danaides and others, representing gods of heroes, crowds of people followed past, men and women resembling statues also, for they were draped in togas, pepluses, and robes, falling with grace and beauty toward the earth in soft folds, on which the rays of the setting sun were aspiring. A gigantic Hercules, with a head in the light yet, from the breast down sunk in shadow cast by the columns, looked from above on that throng. Acte showed Lygia senators on white bordered togas, in colored tunics, in sandals with crescents on them, and knights and famed artists. She showed her Roman ladies in Roman, in Grecian, in fantastic oriental costume, with hair dressed in towers of pyramids, or dressed like the statues of goddesses, low on the head and adorned with flowers. Many men and women did Acte call by name, adding to their names histories, brief and sometimes terrible, which pierced Lygia with fear, amazement, and wonder. For this was a strange world, whose beauty intoxicated her eyes, but those contrasts her girlish understanding could not grasp. In those twilights of the sky, in those rows of motionless columns vanishing in the distance, and in those statuesque people, there was a certain lofty response. It seemed that in the midst of the marvels of simple lines, demigods might live free of care, at peace, and in happiness. Meanwhile the low voice of Acte disclosed time after time a new and dreadful secret of that palace and those people. See, there at the distance is the covered portico. Of those columns and floor are still visible red stains from the blood, with which Caligula sprinkled with the white marble when he fell beneath the knives of Cassius Caera. There his wife was slain. There his child was dashed against a stone. Under that wing is the dungeon in which the younger Drusus gnawed his hands from hunger there, and the elder Drusus was poisoned. There Gemellus quivered in terror, and Claudius in convulsions. There Germanicus suffered. Everywhere those walls heard the groans and death rattle of dying. And those people hurrying now to the feast in togas, in colored tunics, in flowers and in jewels, might be the condemned of tomorrow. On more than one face, perhaps, a smile conceals terror, alarm, the uncertainty of the next day. Perhaps feverish greed, envy are gnawing at this moment into the hearts of those crowned demigods, who in appearance are free of care. Lygia's frightened thoughts could not keep peace with Acte's words, and when that wonderful word attacked her eyes with decreased force, her heart contracted within her from fear, and in her soul she struggled with an immense, inexpressible yearning for the beloved Pomponia Graecina, and the calm house of Aulus, in which love, and not crime, was the ruling power. Meanwhile, new waves of guests were flowing in from the vicious Apollines. From beyond the gates came the uproar and shouts of clients, escorting their patrons. The courtyard and the colonnades were swarming with the multitude of Caesar's slaves, and both sexes, small boys and Petronian soldiers, who kept guard in the palace. Here and there among dark and swarthy visages was the black face of a Numidian, in a feather helmet with large gold rings in his ears. Some were bearing lutes and citaras, hand lamps of gold, silver, bronze, and bunches of flowers wreathed artificially despite the late autumn season. Louder and louder, the sound of conversation was mingled with the splashing of the fountain. The rosy streams which fell from above the marble were broken, as if in sobs. Acte had stopped her narration, but Lygia gazed at the throng, as if searching for someone. All at once her face was covered with a blush, and from among the columns came forth Vinicius with Petronius. They went to the great triclinium, beautiful, calm like white gods in their togas. It seemed to Lygia, when she saw the two known and friendly faces among strange people, and especially when she saw Vinicius, that a great weight had fallen from her heart. She felt less alone. That measureless yearning from Pompoia and the house of Aulus, which had broken in her a little while before, ceased at once to be painful. The desire to see Vinicius and to talk with him drowned in her other voices. In vain did she remember all the evil which she had heard of the house of Caesar, the words of Acte, the warnings of Pompoia. In spite of those words and warnings, she felt at once that not only must she be at the feast, but she wished to be there. At the thought that soon she will be here, and that dear and pleasant voice which had spoken love to her and happiness worthy of the gods, and which would sound like a song in the ears, yet delight seized her straightway. But the next moment she feared that delight. It seemed to her that she will be false to the pure teachings in which he had been reared, false to Pompoia and false to himself. It is one thing to go constrained, and another to delight in such necessity. She felt guilty, unworthy, and ruined. Despair swept her away, and she wanted to weep. Had she been alone, she would have knelt down and beaten her breast, saying, Mea culpa, mea culpa. Acte, taking her hand at the moment, led her through the interior apartments to the grand triclinium, where the feast was to be. Darkness was in her eyes, and roaring in her ears from internal emotion. The beating of her heart stopped her breath. As in a dream, she saw thousands of lamps gleaming on the tables and on the walls. As in a dream, she heard a shout with which the guests greeted Caesar as though amazed. She saw Caesar himself. The shout deafened her. The glitter danced, the odor intoxicated, and loosened the remnant of her consciousness. She was barely able to recognize Acte, who seated at the table and took a place at her side. But after a while, a low known voice was heard on the other side, a greeting, most beautiful of maidens on earth and of stars in heaven, a greeting to thee, divine Calina. Lygia, having recovered somewhat, looked up. At her side was Vinicius. He was without a toga, for convenience and custom has enjoined to cast aside the toga at feast. His body was covered only with sleeveless scarlet tunic embroidered in silver palms. His bare arms were ornamented in Eastern fashion with two broad and golden bands fastened above the elbow. Below they were carefully stripped of hair. They were smooth but too muscular, rear arms of a soldier, where they were made for the swords and the shields, and on his head was a garland of roses, with brows joining above the nose, with splendid eyes and a dark complexion. He was the impression of youth and strength, as it were. To Ligia he seemed so beautiful as though her first amazement had passed, she was barely able to answer. A greeting, Marcus.